When Grace's mother died, she was just 7 years old. Her father remarried within a year, bringing Margaret and her two daughters into their home. At first, Grace tried to be kind. She called Margaret Mum, helped with chores, and shared her toys with the girls. But nothing was ever enough. As the years passed, Grace grew into a quiet beauty. Her skin glowed like polished bronze. Her eyes sparkled with calm strength. Everywhere she went, people stared. But it wasn't just villagers and classmates. Wealthy, educated young men began to visit the house, asking to see her father. Margaret noticed. They always came for Grace, never her daughters Linda or Pamela. No matter how much makeup they wore or how loud they laughed, no man looked their way. Margaret's smile tightened. Her jealousy grew silently, feeding on every compliment Grace received. She tried subtle tricks, telling Grace to wear rags, giving her extra chores so she'd look worn out when guests came. But still, the men only had eyes for Grace. One evening, a rich businessman visited with his mother. Margaret dressed Linda in her finest gown and made Pamela serve drinks. But when Grace entered the room with a tray of water, the guest stood up instantly. "That's her," he whispered to his mother. "That's the one." That night, Margaret's rage boiled in her chest. Her daughters wept quietly in their room. Linda kicked her shoe against the wall, screaming, "What does she have that we don't?" Margaret said nothing, but her eyes were sharp, burning, calculating. She lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness. If men couldn't stop wanting Grace, maybe she had to make Grace undesirable. Maybe beauty wasn't a blessing, it was the root of everything wrong in her house. And Margaret would do what she believed any good mother should: erase it. Margaret watched Grace like a hawk. She began to notice the way men's eyes lingered on her stepdaughter, even strangers on the road. Tailors in the market offered to sew dresses for free. The church youth leader stammered when Grace spoke. It wasn't just beauty, it was presence, a light Margaret couldn't dim. But Margaret wasn't foolish. She didn't scream or hit Grace like some would. She smiled in public. She called her "my dear daughter" to neighbors. But at home her voice turned cold, sharp like a knife behind lace. "You're attracting the wrong kind of attention," she would say. "You're embarrassing this family." Grace tried to keep quiet. She washed extra plates, wore oversized clothes, walked with her head down, but it didn't matter. They still came. One was the son of a senator, another a young engineer. The last one a businessman who offered a bride price so large it could rebuild their entire compound. But they all said the same thing: "Grace. We want Grace." Margaret's daughters, Linda and Pamela, watched this unfold with bitter hearts. They painted their nails, fixed weaves, practiced fake smiles, but nothing worked. No matter how hard they tried, the suitors barely noticed them. One afternoon, after a guest left smiling about Grace again, Margaret slammed her door and locked herself in her room. "This girl will ruin everything," she muttered. "She has turned my house into a parade ground. And my own daughters? Invisible." Then her voice lowered to a whisper, almost too soft to hear. "I warned her. I told her beauty is dangerous." She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. Lines that never used to be there, skin that no longer held the charm of youth. Her breathing deepened, her eyes hardened. If the world only sees her face, then maybe it's time to give them something else to look at. The plan formed quickly. It was cruel, unthinkable. But in Margaret's mind, it was simple. She wouldn't let her daughters be overlooked again. And if Grace lost the very thing that made her special, then balance would return. It happened on a rainy night. The sky rumbled. The air was thick and cold. Grace had returned home late from choir practice. She tiptoed through the back door, not wanting to wake anyone. But Margaret was already waiting. She sat in the corner of the kitchen, barely lit by the dying flame of a lantern, her face calm, too calm. "Why are you just coming in?" she asked, voice flat. "I stayed to clean up after practice," Grace answered gently. "I didn't want to leave things messy." Margaret stood slowly, her eyes dark pools of something unreadable fixed on Grace. "You think you're smart, don't you? Walking around this house like a saint, fooling everyone, making men chase you like dogs." Grace stepped back. I never asked anyone to come." "I warned you, Grace," Margaret said, "but you didn't listen. You left me no choice." Before Grace could respond, Margaret raised her hand. The flash of something sharp, metal glinting in the low light. The scream that tore from Grace's throat was swallowed by thunder. Pain exploded across her face. Warm blood ran into her mouth. Her knees buckled. Margaret stood over her, breathing heavily. "Now let's see if they'll still come for you." The next morning, Grace woke up in her room, bandaged, dizzy, her pillow stained red. Her father never came to check on her. Margaret said he had traveled. Linda and Pamela peeked in and giggled. "She looks like a ghost," Linda whispered. "No man will look at her now." Days passed. The scars hardened. Grace stopped going out, stopped speaking. She would sit at the window, watching children play, her reflection mocking her in the glass. But inside her, something began to grow. Not hate, not anger. Something sharper. Resolve. The first time Grace looked in the mirror after the attack, she gasped. A jagged scar curved from her left cheek down to her jaw. Another ran above her right eyebrow, slicing through the smoothness of her face like a cruel signature. Her once flawless skin, admired, praised, adored, was now broken. She covered her mouth, trembling. Behind her, Margaret stood, arms crossed. "Don't cry," she said coldly. "You should be thanking me. Now men will stop chasing you." Grace couldn't speak. Her voice was trapped somewhere between pain and disbelief. From that day, the real punishment began. She stopped attending church. She no longer went to school. Every day she became more invisible, except to the ones who lived with her. Margaret stopped pretending. She gave Grace the dirtiest chores, the gutters, the pit latrine, scrubbing the floors with her bare hands. "Since you like attention," Margaret would say, "let the world see how useful you really are." Every morning, Grace was woken with a kick. "Lazy thing," Pamela would mutter. "Get up and sweep before the sun rises." They mocked her as she worked. Linda would drag her to the mirror and force her to look. "You see that face?" she'd whisper. "Nobody wants a monster." Pamela joined in. "She should thank Mum. Now she won't distract men anymore." Margaret never scolded them. Sometimes they would gang up to beat her. Margaret first with a cane, then Linda and Pamela with slaps and insults. Once they poured soapy water on her hair and called her a cursed child. "You brought shame to this house," Margaret said, "and now you'll carry it." They made her eat last, sleep on a mat near the door, and wear tattered clothes. Even her father did nothing. "Just endure," he said once, not meeting her eyes. "It's for peace in the house." One evening she stood before the mirror again, staring at the scars. This time she didn't flinch. Her heart beat slowly, her eyes clear. "I'm still here," she whispered to her reflection. Those 3 words were her first in weeks. She touched her scars, not with hate, but with quiet defiance, because deep inside her, something had not died. Something waited, and it was patient. That year, Christmas came with noise, music, and visitors. The town was full of life. Men returned from abroad, women tied bright head wraps, and children ran barefoot, chasing harmattan dust. Grace remained hidden from most of it. She only left the house early in the mornings, when the world was still quiet. That was when she fetched water from the stream, alone, peaceful, unnoticed, until that morning. She bent over the water, filling her calabash slowly, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, startled. A man stood there, tall, calm, brown-skinned with curious, quiet eyes. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "Didn't mean to scare you." Grace nodded and looked away. She was used to silence, used to avoiding stares. But this man didn't walk away. He stepped closer, crouched near the stream, and dipped his hand in the water. "You live around here?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes. I'm David," he said, "visiting for Christmas." She gave her name quietly, barely audible. He noticed her face then, the scars, but he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he smiled. "It's a beautiful name." For the first time in years, Grace smiled back, just a little. They met again the next morning, and the next. Simple conversations, quiet glances, no promises, no pressure. Back at home, Margaret and her daughters had no idea. Linda and Pamela were busy dressing up for village events, laughing loudly and chasing after visiting men. No one noticed Grace slipping away to the stream each dawn. A week later, David arrived at Grace's house with elders. He wanted to marry her. Margaret's jaw dropped. "Her?" she asked, stunned. "You want her? Look at my daughters. Choose one of them instead." David only said, "It's Grace or no one." Still, nobody knew who he truly was. Not yet. The compound buzzed with whispers. "How can it be Grace?" the neighbors murmured. "With all those scars?" Margaret paced her room, fuming. "This must be a joke. Some poor village boy trying to play hero." She called for David. When he entered the parlor, she forced a laugh. "My dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding." David raised an eyebrow. "No misunderstanding, ma'am." Margaret clasped her hands. "You're a young man. You have your whole future ahead of you. Grace is, well, she's not quite what she used to be. I have two beautiful daughters, Linda and Pamela. Educated, healthy, full of life. You can choose." David stared at her in silence. "I don't want them," he said calmly. "I came for Grace." Only Grace. Margaret's face fell. Linda gasped. Pamela hissed under her breath. "You want to marry a scarred girl with no charm?" Margaret barked. "Is it pity? She has nothing. No future, no name." "She has dignity," David replied firm. "And that's more than I've seen in this whole house." The traditional wedding moved forward. Grace wore a modest outfit, her eyes shy but peaceful. David held her hand through it all. The guests couldn't understand it, but they whispered less now. Something about the way he looked at her silenced their gossip. Still, no one knew who he really was, not until the very next morning. A sleek black SUV arrived at their gate. Out stepped a tall man in a suit, holding documents. "Dr. David Okoro," the man greeted. "Your flight to Houston is ready. The clinic confirmed your surgery slots." Margaret's mouth dropped open. "Doctor?" she echoed. "As in, surgeon?" David turned to her, smiling politely. "Yes, I live and work in the U.S. I came home for the holidays, and I found my wife." Margaret stumbled back. Her daughter stood frozen, silent for the first time. But Grace? Grace stood tall. For once, all eyes were on her, and it no longer frightened her. America was nothing like Grace had imagined. Skyscrapers, wide roads, lights that never went out. Everything felt too fast, too loud. But David made sure she never felt lost. He took her hand in every room, introduced her proudly as my wife, and never once looked away from her scars. But he had a plan. One quiet evening, over dinner, he held her hand and said, "Grace, if you're willing, we can remove the scars." Grace froze. "I'm a reconstructive surgeon," he explained. "I can fix them, or we can leave them. It's your choice." Tears filled her eyes, not from the offer, but because someone finally gave her the power to choose. She agreed. The process was slow, painful. Several surgeries, appointments, and healing days. But David never left her side, not once. By the end of the year, the mirror held a new reflection. Her skin was smooth again. The deep scars were gone, replaced with soft, faint lines, barely visible. Her eyes still held pain, yes, but also strength. One day she walked into a dinner party with David, dressed in a flowing wine-red gown, hair braided elegantly. The guests stared, stunned. David simply smiled. "Now you all see what I've seen from the beginning." But Grace never forgot. She never forgot the mat she slept on, the whispered mockery, the night she bled, and she never forgot Margaret. 2 years later, when David asked if she was ready to visit home, she nodded. Not for revenge, just to show them what grace, dignity, and time can do, and how far a wounded girl could rise. The sun was just setting when the black SUV pulled into the village. Dust rose from the tires. Children stopped playing. Traders paused mid-sail. Everyone turned. From the back seat stepped a tall, confident woman in a fitted emerald dress. Her skin glowed. Her eyes sparkled. Her walk was regal, like someone born for the spotlight. No one recognized her, not at first. It wasn't until she reached her father's compound that a whisper floated through the crowd. "Is that Grace?" Heads turned sharply. Margaret rushed outside with Linda and Pamela, thinking another important visitor had arrived. She came out smiling until her eyes met the woman's. Her smile froze. "No," she said softly. "It can't be." Grace looked at her stepmother and sisters calmly. "Good evening," she said. Linda stared in disbelief. "Grace? But how is this you?" Pamela gasped, her mouth wide. "She looks like a queen." Margaret stumbled, her voice shook. "You came back after everything?" Grace's eyes didn't waver. "You thought I wouldn't?" David stepped out of the SUV next. He stood beside Grace, placing a hand on her back protectively. Margaret looked between them, swallowing hard. You brought her back looking like this?" David smiled. "She always looked like this. You just couldn't see it." Neighbors gathered quickly. Phones came out, eyes widened. Murmurs filled the air. Margaret tried to smile. "You've changed. Come inside, let's talk." "No need," Grace replied. "I came to see the place one last time." Pamela's voice cracked. "Can you help us? Maybe talk to your husband. We've been struggling since you left. Things haven't been easy." Grace looked at them all, one by one. "I wish you peace," she said softly, "but I don't owe you anything." She turned to David. "Let's go." And just like that, she walked back into her new life, leaving behind the ones who tried to destroy her. After Grace left, silence fell on the compound. But it didn't stay quiet for long. The village buzzed with gossip. Videos of Grace's return spread like wildfire. Her transformation shocked everyone. Her beauty, elegance, and confidence were the talk of every market stall, every church pew, every family gathering. But for Margaret, Linda, and Pamela, it was a nightmare that wouldn't end. No one came to visit them anymore. The same men who once circled their home now crossed the street to avoid embarrassment. Suitors stopped calling. Neighbors watched them with side eyes and whispered behind their backs. Even the pastor preached about the wickedness of envy, the Sunday after Grace left. Margaret couldn't bear to look up. One day Linda shouted at her mother, "You said scarring her would help us. You said we'd finally be noticed." Pamela threw a plate on the floor. "Now nobody wants us. They only talk about her." Margaret, once proud and sharp-tongued, sat slumped in a plastic chair. Her face had aged. Her voice had faded. The house felt colder, smaller. And the worst part? Grace didn't lift a finger. She didn't retaliate, didn't send angry letters, didn't call to insult them. She simply rose and let the silence destroy them. Every day they lived with the reminder that the girl they mocked, scarred, and belittled had become more than they ever imagined, and all on her own. Linda tried to get work in the city, but doors kept closing. "Aren't you the sister of that Grace woman?" people asked, laughing. Pamela tried to start a business, but nobody supported her. "You people did that girl dirty," one woman spat. The house, once full of false laughter and fake pride, now trembled with regret. But it was too late. The damage they caused had returned. Only this time, not to Grace, but to them. Margaret fell ill 2 months after Grace's return. It started with sharp pains in her chest, then days of coughing that shook her entire body. At first, she waved it off. "Just cold," she said, but it didn't go away. The neighbors noticed. Linda and Pamela took her to the local clinic, but the nurses said she needed better care. Tests, scans, medications, the small facility couldn't provide. They needed real help, money, urgency. Linda picked up her phone. She dialed Grace. Switched off. She called again. And again. Still nothing. Pamela sent voice notes, texts, long messages, even tears. "Please, our mother is dying." But no answer came. For years they had silenced Grace. Now Grace's silence echoed louder than anything they'd ever heard. They tried other relatives, but the bridges Margaret had burned left only ashes. Nobody wanted to get involved. Weeks passed. Margaret's body weakened. Her voice turned to whispers. One morning she reached for Linda's hand. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" she asked, her lips dry. Linda looked away, eyes filled with shame. Pamela cried quietly at the corner of the bed. And then Margaret stopped breathing, just like that. No hospital, no cure, no goodbye. She was buried behind the house. No grand funeral, just the three of them and a few tired shovels. News of her death reached Grace through a family friend. She said nothing. She didn't post, didn't call, didn't cry. She simply continued living, with peace, joy, and freedom. Linda and Pamela still live in the village. No stable jobs, no husbands, just whispers and long days filled with regret. They carry the weight of what they did and the silence of the one they wronged. Sometimes they still dial Grace's number, but no one ever picks up because some lessons come with scars and some mistakes are buried with the ones who made them.